In his early 20s, Theodore Roosevelt was a rising star in the New York State Assembly. He was ambitious and sharp-minded, but physically frail, plagued since childhood by severe asthma. He had everything going for him until a single day broke his world apart. On February 14, 1884, his mother succumbed to typhoid fever. A few hours later, in the exact same house, his 22-year-old wife, Alice, died of kidney failure, just 2 days after giving birth to their first child. Overwhelmed by grief, Roosevelt opened his diary and drew a massive X across the page. Underneath, he wrote a single devastating sentence: "The light has gone out of my life." Unable to bear the memories waiting in every corner of New York high society, he packed his bags. He needed a place completely detached from his former life, somewhere harsh, remote, and punishing. He found that escape in the Dakota Territory. When he stepped off the train in the Badlands, the rugged locals took one look at his thick spectacles and formal coat and wrote him off as a weak Eastern Four Eyes. Roosevelt ignored them. He poured $14,000 into a local cattle operation and established a remote outpost called the Elkhorn Ranch, located 35 miles north of the nearest town, explicitly to isolate himself. He threw himself into punishing physical labor. He spent up to 18 hours a day in the silo, wrangling cattle, breaking horses, and intentionally pushing his body to the absolute brink of exhaustion. He called this daily trial the strenuous life. By subjecting himself to the brutal elements of the frontier, he forced his lungs to conquer his asthma, and he forced his mind to sweat out the paralyzing grief of losing his family. The Badlands in the 1880s were essentially a lawless void. There were no local police, and the scattered settlements were frequently terrorized by outlaws and drifters. One cold evening at a saloon in Mingus, Roosevelt came face to face with this reality. A drunken patron with a cocked gun in each hand began mocking Roosevelt's glasses, loudly demanding that the tenderfoot buy a round of drinks for the bar. The bully didn't realize Roosevelt had been a competitive boxer at Harvard. Roosevelt stood up and delivered a blistering combination of punches to the man's jaw, knocking him completely unconscious against the wooden bar. Word of the brawl spread quickly. By refusing to back down from an armed threat, Roosevelt shattered the local perception of him. He earned the genuine respect of the cowboys and ranchers who shared the frontier. That respect only deepened in the spring of 1886. When 3 armed thieves stole a boat from the Elkhorn Ranch, Roosevelt and 2 of his ranch hands hastily built a raft and chased them down the ice-choked Little Missouri River. After a grueling 300-mile pursuit through freezing rapids, Roosevelt got the drop on the thieves, capturing all 3 at gunpoint. Out on the frontier, horse and boat thieves were typically hanged on the spot. Instead, Roosevelt marched his prisoners 40 miles overland through ankle-deep mud to stand trial. To keep himself awake during the grueling trek, he read Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. This instinct to replace chaos with order extended beyond chasing outlaws. If we look at this historical notice from the Badlands Cowboy newspaper, we can see Roosevelt taking the lead in organizing the area's first stockmen's association, creating a system where ranchers could settle grazing disputes by vote instead of violence. By enforcing the rule of law and organizing the local economy, Roosevelt shed his isolation and emerged from the Badlands as a pivotal civic leader. But just as Roosevelt established order among the men of the Badlands, the environment reminded everyone who was actually in charge. This animated map illustrates the core problem. The Dakota Territory was experiencing a classic tragedy of the commons. Drawn by the promise of free public land, ranchers flooded the region with cattle, and those massive overlapping herds rapidly stripped away the native prairie grasses. Then came the winter of 1886. A series of ferocious blizzards buried the overgrazed plains under layers of deep snow and solid ice, making it impossible for the livestock to forage. When the snow finally melted the following spring, ranchers discovered a catastrophe known as the Great Die-Up. Starvation and freezing temperatures wiped out up to 60% of Roosevelt's herd, destroying a significant portion of his fortune in the process. Walking among the thousands of frozen carcasses, Roosevelt realized that the American West was not an infinite, inexhaustible resource. He saw firsthand that unregulated human industry could quickly destroy the very land it relied on. He returned to the East Coast a different man. His asthma was gone, his grief had scabbed over, and the collapse of the cattle empire had anchored his political philosophy in a new reality. When he eventually ascended to the presidency, he brought the lessons of the Badlands with him. He projected the rugged, commanding presence of a cowboy, but governed with the cautious foresight of someone who had watched a landscape die. This map tracks the scale of his response. Using his executive authority, Roosevelt frequently bypassed Congress to establish 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reserves, and 5 national parks, protecting over 230 million acres of public land from private exploitation. In this historical document, Roosevelt connects his environmental legacy directly to his time in the Dakotas. He wrote, "If it had not been for what I learned during those years I spent here in North Dakota, I never in the world would have been President of the United States." The man who fled to the wilderness seeking a place to hide from death ultimately found his life's purpose in preserving it.